Picture this: a packed airport lounge, bright lights, dozens of witnesses, and a man well-dressed, confident, the kind of man who has never once been told no, walks up to a woman sitting quietly alone and slaps her across the face in front of everyone. Not an argument, not a confrontation that escalated. He simply walked over, grabbed her wrist, and hit her. Then he fixed his watch, laughed, and walked away like nothing happened. The room went silent. Nobody moved. Nobody helped. And the woman, composed, elegant, her hand pressed gently to her burning cheek, did not scream, did not cry, did not beg for help. She simply picked up her phone and typed 3 words to someone. 3 words. And outside the window, a private jet with no commercial markings was touching down on the runway. What that man did not know, what nobody in that lounge knew, was exactly who was on that plane. And what was about to happen next would make every single person in that building understand, in a way they would never forget, what it means to strike the wrong woman. Stay with me, because this story goes places you are not expecting. Every chapter carries a new reveal, a new twist, a new layer, and by the time we reach the end, I promise you, your jaw will have dropped more than once. This is my story, and I lived every single word of it. Before we go any further, drop your location in the comments right now. Where are you watching this from? I want to know if we have people from across the world tuning in, because this community is growing and I love seeing where you all are. And if you are not subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on your notifications. You do not want to miss a single chapter of what comes next. Some people walk into your life quietly. Others walk in at exactly the right moment, just in time to witness the worst thing anyone has ever done to you, and just powerful enough to make sure it becomes the last thing that person ever does carelessly. This is my story, and I promise you, by the time you reach the end, you will understand why I never cried that night. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I already knew who was landing. I was sitting alone in the Incheon International Airport Sky Lounge when my entire body went cold. Not because of the air conditioning, because of the shadow that fell across my table. I had been waiting for my connecting flight to Paris, nursing a glass of water, my cream coat folded neatly over the chair beside me. I was calm. I was composed. I had a window seat booked, a project deadline in 3 days, and absolutely no reason to expect my evening to fall apart. Then I heard his voice, still showing up in places that don't belong to you. I looked up slowly. David Cho was standing 2 feet from my table, the man I had spent 2 years loving in secret, the man who had ended things 18 months ago without a single real explanation. He was wearing a fitted blazer, his hair perfectly styled, and beside him stood a beautiful Korean woman holding his arm like a trophy. 3 of his friends fanned out behind him like an audience waiting for a show. I said nothing. I reached for my water glass. That was apparently the wrong response. David moved fast. He grabbed my wrist, yanked me half out of my seat, and slapped me, open palm, hard, across my left cheek. The lounge went completely silent. A child across the room stopped mid-sentence. A businessman in the corner lowered his newspaper and stared. The soft background music kept playing like nothing had happened, which somehow made it worse. My cheek burned. My eyes watered, not from crying, just from the shock of impact. I pressed my hand to my face and sat very still. David straightened up, adjusted his watch, and said to his girlfriend with a small laugh, "That's what happens when someone doesn't understand their place." Then he walked to the VIP section, like he owned the building. Nobody in that lounge moved to help me. The staff hovered near the service desk, looking at their shoes. I sat there with my hand on my cheek, completely still, for almost 30 seconds. Then my phone buzzed on the table. I looked down at the screen, my lips parted slightly, and I typed back 3 words, "Land safely, baby." Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, a private jet with no commercial markings was beginning its final descent onto the runway. Let me take you back 18 months, because none of what happened that night makes sense without the 18 months before it. My name is Amara. I am 29 years old, Ghanaian British, and I had been living in Seoul for 2 years working as an architect. I came on a contract to design a luxury residential tower complex, and I stayed because the work was extraordinary and because, for the first time in my career, I felt like I was being taken seriously. I met David Cho at a gallery opening. He was charming in that specific, practiced way, the kind of man who makes you feel like the most interesting person in the room, and only later do you realize he does that to everyone. He came from old Korean money. He spoke 4 languages. He laughed at my jokes and remembered small things I mentioned in passing. For 2 years, I was his secret. I was never introduced to his family, never photographed at events he attended, always waiting in his apartment while he went to dinners alone. When I asked about it, he said his family was traditional, that it would take time, that I needed to be patient. I was patient. I was a fool. The day I finally confronted him, he sat across from me with perfectly calm eyes and said, "My family would never accept this, Amara. You always knew that." I left his apartment that evening and did not look back. I rebuilt myself, piece by piece. I got a promotion. I moved into my own penthouse apartment with a view of the Han River. I started eating properly and sleeping again and laughing at things that were actually funny. Then, 4 months after the breakup, I attended a private charity auction. I was not in the mood for people, but my colleague dragged me. I found a quiet corner near the canapes and was contemplating leaving early when a man appeared beside me, picked up the worst-looking mini quiche on the tray, and said with complete seriousness, "I'm going to eat this, and I know I'll regret it. Tell me something good about your evening so I have a reason to stay." I laughed, genuinely, unexpectedly laughed. His name was Jin. He talked to me about Ghanaian architecture, bad airport coffee, and the philosophy of city skylines for 2 hours. At the end of the night, he handed me his business card. I flipped it over in the taxi home. I read the front. I read the back, and I asked my colleague to translate the second line. My colleague went very quiet. My colleague's name was Sarah. She stared at the translation on her phone screen for a long moment before she looked up at me. "Amara," she said carefully, "where exactly did you meet this man?" I told her again. Charity auction, quiet corner, bad quiche. She showed me her screen. The second line beneath Jin's corporate title, Park Holdings International, read something in Korean that Sarah translated as an honorific title. Not a business title. An older one. The kind that belongs to a specific world that operates just beneath the surface of the legitimate one. The next time Jin asked me to dinner, I went, and I asked him directly. He set down his chopsticks. He looked at me for a long moment, and then he told me the truth, all of it, without softening a single word. He was the head of the park organization, one of the oldest networks in East Asia, built over 3 generations on shipping, construction, and favors traded in dark rooms. He had spent 3 years trying to move it fully into legitimate business. He was not finished yet. He said he understood if I never wanted to see him again. I did not leave. Here is why. I had already known. Sarah's reaction had sent me to my laptop for 3 careful hours the night before dinner. I had read everything I could find. I had made a decision before I sat down. I stayed because Jin was the first man who had introduced me to his mother on our second date. His mother had taken my hands in hers, looked at my face, and said quietly that I had kind eyes. She had said it like it mattered. After 2 years of being someone's secret, being looked at like I mattered nearly broke me open completely. I kept that to myself that evening. Jin walked me to my door. He said goodnight like a gentleman. I closed the door and leaned against it in the dark for a long time. Now cut back to the airport, back to the present, back to my burning cheek. Because while I was sitting with my hand pressed to my face, one of Jin's security team, a man named Kang who had worked for Jin for 11 years, had already walked past David Cho's table. He had already recognized him. He had already taken a photograph discreetly and sent 3 words to the jet's communications officer. He's still here. The plane was on the runway, and the walls were already closing. I did not know any of that was happening. What I knew was that my cheek hurt, the lounge staff were avoiding my eyes, and David was across the room laughing with his friends over champagne like he had just done something worth celebrating. I made a decision. I was not going to sit there and shrink. I straightened my back, signaled to the nearest attendant, and asked to speak with the lounge manager. The manager came over. He was a slim man in his 40s with nervous hands. He listened to me explain what had happened. He looked at my cheek. He looked across the room at David. And then he said, in a voice designed to be apologetic without actually being helpful, "Miss, I'm very sorry, but the gentleman has indicated he has a personal relationship with the lounge director. I'm afraid there's very little I can." "He hit me," I said, flat, clear. The manager blinked. He opened his mouth. He closed it again. My phone rang. I looked at the screen. "Jin," I answered immediately. His voice was quiet and completely steady. "Don't move. I'm inside." I lowered the phone. I looked toward the main entrance of the lounge. And there he was. Jin walked in the way pressure changes before a storm, not dramatically, not loudly, but in a way that made the air in the room feel different. He was in a dark suit, no tie, and he crossed the entire floor at a calm and measured pace. Two men followed him at exactly the right distance, present without hovering, still without being stiff. His eyes found my face first. I watched them move to my cheek. I watched something settle in his jaw, not anger, exactly. Something quieter and more permanent than anger. He sat down across from me. He took both my hands in his. He said nothing for 5 seconds. Then, "Does it hurt?" "Yes," I said. He nodded once, like he was storing it carefully somewhere he would not forget. Around the lounge, things were changing without any visible drama. Two members of Jin's outer security had taken positions near the exits, not blocking anything, just present. The lounge manager, who 60 seconds ago had been explaining why he could not help me, was now standing very straight behind the service desk. He had recognized who had just walked in. And across the room, one of David's friends leaned over and whispered something urgently in David's ear. David looked up for the first time. He did not know Jin's face, but he felt the room. He flagged down a waiter and quietly asked who that man was. The waiter excused himself without answering. Then the manager walked to our table, not to ask Jin to leave, to apologize, loudly enough for the whole lounge to hear. The manager's apology was elaborate and deeply public. He apologized for the failure of care. He personally arranged for a senior attendant to check on me. He comped the entire table and spoke with the kind of visible deference that tells a room everything it needs to know about who it is dealing with. David watched all of it from across the lounge. His girlfriend, Min, tugged his sleeve. One of his friends held up his phone screen. Whatever was on, it made the color shift in David's face. Jin ordered tea. He asked me to tell him what happened. Not because he did not know, Kang had already given him the outline. He asked because he wanted me to say it. He sat across from me with complete attention, and I told him everything from the moment David's shadow fell over my table to the moment Jin walked through the door. When I finished, Jin was quiet for a moment. Then he asked one question. "Did anyone in this room help you?" I said no. He looked slowly around the lounge, not with menace, with something closer to tired disappointment. Then he said to Kang, standing 2 feet behind him, "Make a note of the staff on duty tonight." Kang nodded without expression. Then David stood up. He buttoned his jacket with steady hands and walked across the lounge toward our table. His chin was slightly raised. His face wore the expression of a man who has decided that the best way out of a situation is to own it through sheer confidence. He stopped at the edge of our table. He spoke in Korean, his tone dismissive, essentially telling Jin that Amara had a habit of creating drama, that they had a difficult history, that she tended to exaggerate. He used a specific phrase that placed me firmly in the category of someone temporary and disposable. He smiled while he said it. Jin listened to every single word without interrupting. When David finished, Jin gestured to the empty chair at the table. "Sit down, Mr. Cho." David blinked. "You know my name." Jin's expression shifted in a way that was very difficult to describe. Not quite a smile, more like the moment before a door closes. "I know your father's name," Jin said. "Your father knows mine." The remaining color left David's face. Because there are names in Seoul, certain names, that carry weight beyond business and money. Weight that has been accumulating for decades. David sat down, not because he chose to, but because his body understood something his brain was still catching up to. Jin slid his phone across the table. It was open to a single photograph. David stared at it. His jaw tightened slowly. It was a photograph of him, taken tonight, at the exact moment his hand was raised. Jin explained the photograph the way someone might explain a straightforward fact about the weather. He said the image was time-stamped, geotagged, and already saved in 3 separate secure locations. He said he had formally requested the lounge's security footage, and that given certain relationships with the airport authority, the request would be fulfilled within the hour. He was not threatening, he was informing. David tried to recover. He called it a misunderstanding. He said it was a private matter. He used the word provoked, and I watched Jin's expression stay perfectly still through all of it, which was somehow more frightening than any visible reaction. Then Jin raised one finger, not pointing at anyone, just raising it like a pause button. "She is my wife," he said. The lounge did not go silent because nobody was speaking loudly, but the quality of the silence changed. David looked at me. I looked back at him. I watched him cycle through 5 different emotions in the space of 3 seconds: disbelief, recalculation, fury, fear, and something that looked almost like grief, though I was not interested in exploring that. Jin continued, "I am not going to destroy you tonight." David exhaled. Jin added, "That would be too fast." David's exhale stopped halfway. Then Jin's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen. His expression shifted, becoming something I had never seen on his face before. Something almost curious. He looked at David again. "Your father just called me," Jin said. "He would like you to come home." Chairman Cho, David's father, had built his construction company on a foundation of contracts that, 20 years earlier, had passed through Jin's organization. The relationship was not illegal, but it was the kind of relationship that creates obligations. Deep, long-remembered ones. When Jin was younger, he had personally intervened to protect Chairman Cho's business from a hostile takeover. Chairman Cho had never forgotten it. And now, his son had struck Jin's wife in a public lounge. The phone call between Jin and Chairman Cho, which I could partially hear from across the table, was brief. The older man's voice was sharp and horrified. Not for me, I understood that clearly. He was horrified for his family name, for the optics, for the negotiations currently active between Cho Construction and Park Holdings. David stood. He straightened his jacket. He looked at me one last time and said, "You always wanted to matter, Amara. Congratulations." Then he walked out. I watched the door close behind him. Then I laughed, a short, surprised, real laugh. Jin looked at me. I said, "He actually thinks this is over." Jin said nothing. Instead, his assistant appeared at the table and placed a slim folder in front of him. Jin looked at the tab. Something changed in his expression. He looked at me. "There is something in here you need to see." The folder contained corporate ownership documents for the Sky Lounge itself. Jin walked me through it slowly. The lounge was a subsidiary of a larger hospitality group. That group was co-owned, buried 3 layers deep in the corporate structure, by a man I recognized immediately, Marcus Webb. British Ghanaian, mid-50s, smooth in the way that men who operate in gray areas tend to be smooth. I had met him at an industry event 8 months ago. He had tried aggressively to recruit me away from my architecture firm. I had turned him down. He had been icily polite about it afterward, in a way that felt less like acceptance and more like postponement. I stared at his name in the documents. Jin told me that his team had been separately investigating Marcus for weeks over a shipping contract dispute, nothing to do with me. But now the 2 separate investigations had crossed in a way that felt too neat to be accidental. Jin said, "The job offer he made you last spring, do you know why he made it?" I said I had assumed it was genuine recruitment. Jin shook his head. "Your current firm was bidding against his consortium on a major development project on Jeju Island. You are responsible for 40% of your firm's revenue. Removing you from the firm before the bid closed would have severely weakened your firm's submission. I felt the pieces shift and settle, not random, not coincidental. I asked the question that had been building quietly since David walked across the lounge. Was tonight planned? David being here, was it a coincidence? Jin did not answer immediately. That pause answered for him. I sat back in my chair. My cheek still hurt. The lounge was quiet around us, and I realized slowly and with great clarity that the evening had not been a random collision of bad luck. It had been assembled. Someone had put David Cho in that lounge at that time, knowing I would be there. Someone had wanted a scene. Someone had needed me publicly humiliated, rattled, and professionally destabilized. How did they know my schedule? I asked. Jin's expression was careful. We're still confirming the details, but it appears the information came from someone inside your professional circle, someone who did not fully understand what they were sharing. I thought of everyone I had told about the Paris trip. My colleagues, my assistant. I went very still. My assistant, I said. It was Priya. Jin confirmed it, but he was careful about how he did. Priya, my assistant of 14 months, had been quietly dating one of David's close friends for the past 4 months. She did not know the full picture. She had mentioned my travel schedule the way people mention small details about their lives, casually, without understanding the shape of the thing those details were being fitted into. She was not a conspirator. She was a thread that someone else had pulled. I sat with that for a moment. I was not angry at Priya. I was sad for her, actually. She had been used by someone she trusted, the same way I had been. But I did not have time for sadness right now. I opened my laptop. Jin watched me. What are you doing? Submitting the Jeju bid, I said. Tonight, before midnight. Jin looked at the time. The lounge Wi-Fi. My laptop showed no connection. I clicked the network icon again. Nothing. I tried twice more. Dead. Jin looked at Kang. Something passed between them silently. Kang swept the lounge in 90 seconds, moving efficiently, checking corners, checking the service corridors. 2 more of Jin's outer team covered the wider terminal. The Wi-Fi had not simply failed. It had been jammed, locally, by a device that had to be within 200 meters of where I was sitting, which meant that whoever was coordinating against me was not doing it from a boardroom across the city. They were doing it from inside Incheon Airport, right now, tonight. The device and its operator were found within 8 minutes. He was sitting in a service corridor adjacent to the lounge, wearing a maintenance uniform with a phone showing 1 active call. He ran when he saw Jin's team coming. He did not get far. He turned out to be a 24-year-old tech assistant hired through a freelance app, paid in cash, told it was a corporate prank. Frightened, cooperative, and completely in over his head. His phone gave them the burner number that had hired him. The burner had been purchased at a specific convenience store near Incheon Station. That store had cameras. Jin looked at the sequence of the evening, the slap, the jammed Wi-Fi, Marcus Webb's name in the lounge's ownership structure, and said quietly, "This was never about embarrassing you. This was about stopping the bid." I nodded. Then I looked up from my laptop with an expression that I think surprised him. "I already sent the bid," I said. 40 minutes ago, from the bathroom, on my mobile data before any of this started." The look on Jin's face in that moment was something I will keep for the rest of my life. He was quiet for a beat, genuinely, fully quiet, and then something settled in his expression that was not quite surprise and not quite pride. Something warmer than both. I explained. When David had first appeared at my table, something had felt constructed about it. The friend's position just so. The girlfriend angled for maximum audience. The staff's odd passivity. I did not know the full plan, but I had learned, over years of being the only person in rooms who looked like me, to trust the feeling that something was wrong before I could name it. Before David even spoke, I had gone to the bathroom. I had opened my laptop, connected to my mobile data, and emailed the complete bid documents to my co-architect in Paris, a woman named Claire who had been my collaborator since the project's beginning. All Claire needed was my authorization code, which I sent in a follow-up message. I had also opened my voice recorder application. It had been running the entire time. It captured David's words clearly. It captured the slap. It captured his speech about knowing one's place. Jin looked at me for a long moment after I finished explaining. Then he said something he said very rarely. "I didn't know you had done that. I should have known." "You were trying to protect me," I said. "You had already protected yourself." "I've been the only one in too many rooms for too long," I said. "I learned to move before they do." He reached across the table and held my hand. Not dramatically, just held it. That was enough. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I looked at Jin. He nodded slightly. I answered on speaker. A woman's voice came through, controlled, intelligent, carrying the particular accent of someone educated in both Korea and America. She introduced herself as Vivienne Song. She said she was Marcus Webb's business partner. She said she had information about Jin that I would want to hear before the evening progressed any further. She suggested we speak privately. She said I had more to lose than my husband did. I said, "Give me 1 hour." I hung up. The table was quiet. I looked at Jin. "Is she right?" I asked. "Does she have something real on you?" A pause, long enough to matter. "It's real," he said, "but it isn't what she believes it to be." "Then show me," I said. "Everything, right now. No protection, no filtering, the full truth." Jin told me the Busan story. 4 years ago, a city official named Assemblyman Pak had approached Park Holdings with a proposal. He wanted to use one of their financial subsidiaries as a channel for payments that were, he claimed, legitimate government disbursements. Jin had refused. He had recognized what it was. But before Jin was made aware of the approach, a low-level accounts officer in the subsidiary had accepted a single wire transfer, believing it was standard business. When Jin discovered it, he did not handle it quietly inside the organization. He contacted a senior investigator named Director Shin, a man he had known for years, and reported everything. Director Shin investigated, quietly, and confirmed the origin of the funds. Assemblyman Pak was removed from his position through internal political channels. The investigation was buried, not by Jin, but by the politicians above Pak, who did not want the scandal reaching their own offices. Vivienne Song had been Assemblyman Pak's trade lawyer during that period. She had seen partial documents, enough to make Park Holdings appear complicit if the context was removed. She had been holding those documents for 4 years, waiting for a moment when they would be most useful. She had also, Jin told me, previously used related evidence to extort Assemblyman Pak's family after the case closed. She had done this before. I listened to all of it. I asked hard questions. Jin answered every one of them without deflection. When he finished, I was quiet for a moment. Then I asked, "Director Shin, do you still have contact with him?" Jin said yes. Shin was now the deputy director of the Financial Crimes Division. I nodded. I was building something. I could feel the shape of it forming. "Does Vivienne know Shin was involved?" I asked. "No," Jin said. I stood up and put on my cream coat. My cheek had stopped burning. My mind was clear. "Then we are going to make a phone call of our own," I said. I placed the call to Deputy Director Shin myself. Jin had offered to do it. I asked him not to. I explained why. Shin needed to understand that what was happening tonight was not just a favor being called in between old associates. It was a credible extortion threat with documented precedent, and the person presenting it needed to be someone without a personal history with him, someone whose account would carry independent weight. Shin answered on the second ring. His voice was measured and professional. Jin introduced me briefly, then handed the call to me. I laid out the situation with the same precision I use when presenting a building design to a review committee, clearly, logically, without emotion obscuring the structure. Vivienne Song possessed partial documents from the Busan case. She intended to release them tonight to derail a legitimate business bid. If Shin issued a formal certified statement clarifying the case timeline and establishing Park Holdings as a reporting party rather than a conspirator, the documents lost their destructive context. Shin was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "She extorted the Pack family after the case closed. 2 payments over 14 months. We chose not to pursue it because reopening the case would have exposed the political cover-up." Which meant she had done this before. Which meant there were other victims. Which meant Shin had been waiting for a clean reason to act. "This is a clean reason," I said. Another silence. Then, "I'll have a certified statement prepared by 6 in the morning." We thanked him and ended the call. And then Kang appeared quietly at Jin's shoulder with a message. Vivienne Song was not calling from a hotel room or a city office. She was in the airport. She had flown in from Tokyo 2 hours earlier and was currently in the business lounge on the upper level. She had come in person. That was wrong. That meant she had expected tonight to require her physical presence. She had expected to close something here, tonight, in this building. A deal she needed a signature for, something that required her being in the room. "What does she need to be here for?" I asked. Jin's expression became very still. Kang's team watched Vivienne's movements on the upper level for the next 20 minutes. In that time, she met with 2 people. The first was Marcus Webb, who had arrived on a separate flight from London 3 hours earlier. The second was a man I recognized from his professional photograph, a man named Gregory Han, who was a senior partner at my architecture firm. Gregory, who had been subtly undermining me for 2 years, who had twice tried to pull major clients toward his own project list, who had been cold and professionally territorial in ways I had chalked up to ego, who had been inside my firm the entire time. Jin's team had been monitoring Marcus's activities in connection with the shipping dispute. What they had uncovered over the past 6 weeks, and what the folder had only partially shown me, was the full picture. Marcus Webb and Vivienne Song were not simply trying to win the Jeju contract. They were trying to acquire my architecture firm. The plan required 3 things: Amara gone, the Jeju bid lost, and the firm destabilized enough to accept a low acquisition offer. If they succeeded, they would buy the firm at a distressed valuation, flip the Jeju contract to their development consortium, and walk away with the firm's decade-long reputation in their pocket. Gregory Han had been promised an equity stake in the new structure. I had brought in 40% of the firm's revenue last year. I had built its reputation project by project for 5 years, and Gregory had been selling it from under me with a handshake deal and a promised cut. The feeling that moved through me in that moment was not anger. It was something colder and more focused than anger. I looked at Jin. "I want to buy the firm." He did not hesitate. "I'll make the call." I looked at my phone. Then I found Gregory Han's contact, pressed call, and when he answered with a careful, perfectly ordinary hello, I kept my voice completely warm. "Gregory," I said, "I heard you were at Incheon tonight. Would you like to come down and join us for a drink? There's someone I'd like you to meet." Gregory came downstairs wearing the expression of a man who believes he has already won. I stood to greet him. I introduced him to Jin with the ease of someone introducing old friends. I watched his face in the fraction of a second between hearing the name Park and assembling a response, watched the recognition move through his eyes, watched him recalibrate behind a polished smile. He sat. I ordered wine. I talked about the Jeju bid warmly, in the way of someone who is very proud of the team's work and full of optimism about the outcome. I asked Gregory what he thought our chances were. He answered generously, even enthusiastically. Every word was being recorded on my phone. Jin's legal team was also listening live on a secondary line. I let the conversation breathe for a few minutes. Then I leaned forward slightly and dropped my voice to a confidential register. "Gregory," I said, "the managing partners received an acquisition offer tonight from a holding company. Do you know anything about that?" He held his expression well, not perfectly, but well. "I may have heard something passing around, nothing." "The holding company," I said gently, "lists you as a silent investor." Silence. "I want to give you a chance to explain," I said. "Before I bring this to the full partnership, I've always respected you, Gregory, you know that." It was not entirely a lie. I had respected him once in the early years. He looked at me. He looked at Jin. And then something in him, perhaps the accumulated pressure of the evening, perhaps the claustrophobic reality of being boxed in on all sides, cracked open into anger. "You were never supposed to get the sole contract in the first place," he said. "It was arranged for another firm. Somebody interfered. Somebody who had no business involving himself in a clean bidding process." He looked directly at Jin. Him. The table went quiet. Jin said nothing. He simply looked at Gregory with calm, patient eyes. And I understood, in that moment, that there was a story I had never been told. A story about how I had come to be sitting in Seoul at all. Jin confirmed it. 3 years ago, before I arrived in Seoul, before Jin knew my name or my face or that I existed, my firm had submitted a bid for a residential complex project. The contract had been politically steered toward a competitor, a firm with connections to a government committee member. The steering was quiet and corrupt in the way these things tend to be. Favors traded, phone calls made, a result arranged before the evaluation was officially concluded. Jin's organization, operating in the space between legal and illegal where they still partially existed at the time, had pushed back. Not because of me. Because the competitor firm had a documented history of cutting corners on labor conditions that Jin found personally unacceptable. He had neutralized the corruption in the bidding process, not to help anyone in particular, but because the corruption offended something in him. My firm won the contract fairly. I won my position on merit. He had never told me because by the time he connected the architect whose work he had admired in a briefing report to the woman laughing at his bad quiche joke at a charity auction, the telling of it would have looked like manipulation, like leverage, like something he was holding. So he held his silence instead, which was a different kind of error, and one he had thought about. Gregory Hand sat across the table listening to this, and understood with complete clarity that his argument, that I was elevated by connections, that my success was constructed rather than earned, had just been destroyed by the very person he was using to make it. Jin looked at Gregory calmly. "My legal team is on the line. You have one opportunity to cooperate fully, which I recommend." Gregory's polished surface had dissolved completely. He looked old and cornered and diminished. Then Jin's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. He went very still in a way I had not seen all evening, not the controlled stillness of a man exercising patience, but the genuine stillness of a man caught off guard. "Vivienne's song is not upstairs," Kang said from behind him. She had left the building. She had not left alone, and she had taken something from the airport's private document storage facility on the administrative level, something that belonged to Jin. The document was a trust instrument. Jin explained it quickly and without softening. 8 months ago, when we married in a small civil ceremony attended by 4 people, Jin had established a legal trust that named me as a protected beneficiary of a Park Holdings subsidiary. The trust instrument was a physical document, kept in the airport's private secure storage because Jin used the facility regularly during transit. It was one of 4 physical copies in existence. Our marriage was not public. We had made the decision together. The Jeju deal was politically sensitive, a high-profile union between Korea's most prominent formerly syndicate-affiliated executive and a Ghanaian British architect would attract the kind of scrutiny that conservative investors used as an excuse to pull out of deals. We had agreed to wait until the contract was awarded. We had agreed it was temporary discretion, not shame. Vivienne, Song now had proof of the marriage. Her play was clear. She would leak it, frame it as Jin using me as a business proxy to obtain the Jeju contract through a politically connected marriage, triggering a conflict of interest review that would kill the contract regardless of merit. It was clean. It was devastating. It was the kind of move that does not require anything illegal, just the right information delivered to the right journalist at the right moment. Jin turned to me, and for the first time all evening, he looked, not defeated, but honest in a way that went deeper than strategy or calm. "I am sorry," he said. "I should have announced our marriage when we decided to marry. I made you quiet for different reasons than he did, but I still made you quiet. That was wrong." I looked at him across the table. I thought about David's words, You always wanted to matter. I thought about Jin's mother holding my hands and saying I had kind eyes. I thought about 8 months of being genuinely, quietly, unambiguously loved. You didn't hide me, I said. We made a business decision together. I agreed to it. I picked up my phone. Now we are going to fix it. Tonight, before she reaches a single journalist. I called reporter Yoon Jae-young. She had been trying to profile me for 6 months. I had politely declined every time, not because I was uninterested, but because the timing had never been right, and I did not love the idea of my professional achievements being framed primarily through the lens of being a Black woman architect in Seoul, which I had noticed was where every proposed interview kept gravitating. Tonight, I was offering something different. I told her I had an exclusive, not soft and profile-shaped, hard and documented, corporate sabotage of a major development bid, an extortion scheme with a paper trail, audio evidence of a public assault, and a personal story that connected all of it. She said she could be at Incheon within 40 minutes. She was there in 32. The interview was conducted right there in the Sky Lounge, Jin beside me, the lounge quiet around us past midnight, the floor-to-ceiling windows showing the runway outside. Reporter Yoon was sharp and fast and did not ask a single soft question. I appreciated that enormously. I released the audio recording of David's assault. I provided the corporate document trail connecting Marcus Webb and Vivienne's song to the bid sabotage and the attempted firm acquisition. I walked through the Wi-Fi jamming, the hired technician, the chain of coordination. And then, at the end, I looked directly at reporter Yoon's phone camera. My husband flew in tonight to make sure I was all right, I said. We have been married for 8 months. I am very proud of that. I reached over and took Jin's hand on the table. Jin, who I had watched stay completely composed through everything the evening had delivered, through David's arrogance, through Gregory's betrayal, through Vivienne's threats, looked at our joined hands for a moment. Then he looked at me. And for just 1 second, something in his face came fully undone and reassembled. The article was live at 1:47 in the morning. By 3 a.m., it was the most read piece on every major Korean business platform. Vivienne's song, sitting in an airport car trying to determine her next move, opened her phone. She read the article once, then she read it again, then she made a phone call. She called David Cho. David had been home for 2 hours, sitting in his father's study, absorbing the quiet and devastating weight of Chairman Cho's disappointment. His father had not raised his voice. He had not needed to. He had simply said, with the kind of stillness that only comes from great control over great fury, "You let a woman use you to harm Jin Park's wife. In public. You have put your hand on a woman and shamed this family in a way I cannot undo with a phone call." David's phone showed him the article. His name was in the second paragraph. The audio file was embedded. Anyone who clicked play would hear his voice clearly. Vivienne called while he was still staring at the screen. She told him to stay silent, to let the family lawyers absorb it, to say nothing publicly. David looked at his father across the desk. Then he hung up on Vivienne. He sat for another minute. He thought about what he had done in that lounge, not the slap as a legal or reputational problem, but the slap as an action performed by a person he had been. He thought about 2 years of keeping someone wonderful in a box because he lacked the courage to say out loud that he was in love with her. He thought about what that cowardice had ultimately produced. He found Jin's number in his phone. Jin answered on the first ring. David spoke for 11 minutes. He told Jin everything. Vivienne's plan from the beginning, his own recruitment into it, who had coordinated the technical side, where the physical evidence against Marcus Webb could be independently located. He provided everything. Then he went quiet for a moment. And then he said something that was not strategy and not calculation. She was the best person I ever had in my life, and I threw her away because I was afraid of my family's opinion of me. Jin said nothing. "I'm not asking for anything," David said. "I just want to say you're lucky you're not a coward." They agreed on a formal statement. David said yes to everything. After Jin relayed the call to me, including the last part, which he almost did not share, but did because he had promised me no more omissions, I was quiet for a long moment. "Does it change how you feel about what he did tonight?" I asked. "No," Jin said. "Good," I said. "Me neither." I paused. "But thank you for telling me." Marcus Webb had been following the story's explosion online from a private lounge in a different terminal. He had watched Vivienne's plan dismantle in real time. He had watched Gregory Hen go dark on his phone. He had watched David Cho's name appear in a published article with audio evidence attached. He was watching the consortium's Jeju bid become radioactive. But Marcus did not run. Men like Marcus Webb, in my experience, do not run when things go wrong. They escalate. They find a door that is not yet locked and they push through it as hard as they can. The door he found was a conservative assemblyman named Lee Dee-jin, who had built a 16-year political career on opposing the legitimization of syndicate-connected businesses. Lee was vocal, visible, and always hungry for a clean story that fit his existing message. Marcus fed him the Busan documents, stripped of all context, stripped of Director Shin's involvement, stripped of the timeline that showed Jin as the person who reported the irregularity rather than the person who created it. Just the raw partial evidence, shaped to look like proof of what Lee had always claimed about Park Holdings. Assemblyman Lee called a press conference for 9 in the morning. For a few hours before dawn, as I sat in the Sky Lounge watching the first gray light come into the windows, it looked like Marcus had found his exit. He would hide behind a political storm. He would let the story reframe. He would regroup and return later in a different shape. But Deputy Director Shin had not gone to sleep. His formal certified statement, documenting the full Busan timeline, establishing Jin's reporting role, and for the first time placing Vivienne Song's prior extortion of the Pak family on the official record, dropped on the Financial Crimes Division's public portal at 6 in the morning. Reporter Yoon linked to it within 4 minutes of publication. By the time Assemblyman Lee stood at his podium at 9 a.m., 3 journalists in the front row were already holding their phones up with Shin's statement displayed. The press conference did not end cleanly. It dissolved, live, streamed on 4 platforms simultaneously. Marcus Webb's consortium withdrew its Jeju bid by 10 o'clock, citing changed circumstances. Gregory Hand sent his resignation to the managing partners by noon. Vivienne Song was arrested at Incheon's departure gate at 8:30 in the morning, document in hand, with David's signed statement and Shin's certification already with the prosecutor's office. My phone rang at 10:15. It was the managing partners. They wanted to meet. They said the word ownership, and they said it first. The meeting with the managing partners happened 2 days later in a conference room on the 14th floor of our firm's building in central Seoul. There were 4 partners present. They were careful and professional, and the conversation was conducted with the kind of formal warmth that people use when they are trying to correct a serious oversight without directly acknowledging the seriousness of it. They offered me a senior equity stake, full partner status, a seat on the acquisition review committee that would evaluate any future offers for the firm, including the one they had just formally declined. I accepted. I negotiated 3 specific terms before I signed anything. They agreed to all 3. Walking out of that building into the afternoon light with the signed agreement in my bag, I stopped on the pavement for a moment and just stood there. I had not done that in a long time, just stood somewhere and let myself feel the full weight of what had happened. 3 weeks later, the Jeju Island development bid was awarded to our firm. We were the only remaining submission with a complete and clean audit trail. The environmental review was thorough. The design was, if I say so myself, extraordinary. The announcement was covered by 4 major publications. Reporter Yoon wrote the lead piece. There is a photograph from the project announcement that I keep on my desk. I am shaking hands with the chair of the development committee. My back is straight, my expression is calm, and I am looking directly at the camera the way someone looks at a camera when they have absolutely nothing to prove. Jin is standing 2 feet behind me, slightly to the left. His hands are in his pockets. He is not looking at the camera. He is looking at me with the expression of someone watching something they admire. And there is the smallest, most private smile on his face, the kind that is not for the room, only for the person he is watching. I did not notice it until I looked at the photograph later. I sent it to his phone with the message, "I told you to stop." He replied, "I didn't stop." I put the phone down and smiled at the ceiling. In the weeks that followed, I thought often about the shape of what had happened, not just the events themselves, but the patterns inside them. I thought about how the same story can be constructed differently depending on where you place the beginning. If you begin it in that lounge, the night a man raised his hand and brought it across my face, it looks like a story about humiliation and rescue. The woman wronged and the powerful husband arriving to right it. That is not the story. The story begins much earlier, in 2 years of being someone's hidden thing, of learning to move quietly through rooms where I was not fully acknowledged, in the discipline that experience built in me, in the careful, unglamorous work of rebuilding myself afterward, not because someone was watching, but because I was. The story begins with a charity auction and a terrible quiche, and a man who introduced me to his mother as someone important. The story begins with me, in a bathroom stall, 30 seconds after a man I once loved sat down across from me with performance in his eyes, sending a bid document to Paris on my mobile data, because my instincts told me the evening was constructed. I was not waiting to be saved that night. I was executing, and Jin, when he walked through that door, was not arriving to rescue me. He was arriving to stand beside someone who had already handled it. There is a difference. It matters enormously. I tell Priya this story, edited for the parts that are mine to keep private, over dinner 3 weeks after the airport. She had found out about her role from Jin's team, gently, carefully, with full acknowledgement that she was not at fault. She sat across from me at dinner and cried for 20 minutes. I let her cry. I refilled her glass. Then I told her she was not the first person to have a detail extracted by someone they trusted, and she would not be the last, and the correct response was not guilt but awareness. She nodded a lot. She apologized anyway several more times. I told her to stop. She is still my assistant. She is excellent. She is now, if anything, more protective of my schedule than a security detail. I do not think about David Cho very often. When I do, it is not with anger. It is with something closer to pity, a clean, brief pity, not the kind that lingers. He had something extraordinary and he was afraid of what people would say. That is an ordinary tragedy and the world is full of them. Jin and I had breakfast on the Sunday after the Jeju announcement. He made coffee, badly, as always. I told him it was terrible. He agreed, as always. We sat by the window overlooking the city and talked about the next project and what I wanted the year to look like. It was, start to finish, a completely ordinary morning. It was the best kind of morning there is. I want to tell you something about the night in the lounge that I have not said yet. When David's hand came across my face and the room went silent, there was a moment, maybe 3 or 4 seconds, where the old Amara rose up. The Amara who had spent 2 years making herself smaller to fit into a space someone else had defined for her. The Amara who had been patient and understanding and quietly devastated. That version of me recognized the blow and absorbed it the way she had always absorbed things, folded it in, kept the exterior smooth. And then she sat back down inside me, because I was not her anymore. I pressed my hand to my cheek. I breathed. I looked around that lounge at the faces carefully looking away, at the staff near the service desk finding reasons to be elsewhere, at David settling into the VIP section with the satisfaction of a man who expects no consequence. And I thought, not this time. I did not think it dramatically. I did not need to. It was simply a fact, the way architectural load-bearing principles are facts, not exciting, just true and structural and important. The bid was sent, the recording was running, my husband was landing. Everything else was detail. I tell this part of the story carefully because I think it is the most important part, more important than the confrontations and the documents and the arrests and the equity stake. It is important because the victory of that evening did not begin when Jin walked through the door. It began in a bathroom stall with a laptop and a mobile data connection, and a woman who had learned, through considerable pain, to trust herself completely. That is the thing no one can take from you. Not a slap, not a conspiracy, not 2 years of being kept secret by someone too cowardly to love you in the open. You can try to destabilize a person. You can jam their Wi-Fi. You can put their name in the newspapers for the wrong reasons. You can raise your hand in a public room and expect them to shrink. But you cannot reach inside someone and remove what they have built in themselves. That is the one thing that is genuinely, structurally, permanently theirs. I know this because someone tried. And by 1:47 in the morning, I was still standing. The article was live, and my husband was holding my hand in an airport lounge. 6 months after the airport, I was standing on the Jeju Island construction site for the first time. The ground had just been cleared. The foundation surveys were complete. My design, 3 years of thinking and revising and arguing with physics and light, was about to become something you could stand inside, something that would exist in the physical world long after I was gone. Jin came with me that day, which surprised me slightly. He is not, generally, a man who comes to places without a reason. He does not accompany people to things for the social warmth of accompanying them. He is present when he intends to be present and absent when he intends to be absent, and there is never any ambiguity about which is happening. I asked him why he was there. He looked at the cleared site, at the boundary markers, at the sea beyond it. He said, "I want to see the beginning of something you built." We stood there for a while in the wind. I showed him where the main residential structure would stand, where the light would come in at the northern corner in the early morning, why I had oriented the communal spaces the way I had. He listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I love about him, the quality of his attention when something matters to him. Then he said, "When you described the design the first time in your bid documents, I read it before I knew you were the architect." I turned to look at him. "I read it for the Jeju evaluation briefing," he said. 3 months before the airport, I noted the name." He paused. "I had been planning to find a reason to meet the architect." I stared at him. "You never told me that." "I was uncertain," he said, "whether it would seem like I was claiming credit for a coincidence." I looked at the site. I looked at the sea. I thought about the long, strange, painful, extraordinary road that had led from a gallery opening in Seoul to a charity auction quiche to an airport lounge to this piece of cleared ground on an island. Then I laughed, genuinely, unexpectedly, the way I had laughed that first night over the bad quiche. "Jin," I said, "you are the most ridiculous man." He smiled. It reached his eyes. We stayed until the light changed. There is a voice memo on my phone from the night after the airport. I recorded it at 4 in the morning, sitting by the window in the Sky Lounge while Jin handled paperwork with his legal team at another table, and Kang stood guard in the corridor with the steady patience of someone who has stood in corridors for 11 years. The lounge was quiet. The city outside was dark and then slowly not dark. I pressed record and just talked, not for any audience, just to hear myself say the things out loud that I needed to say out loud. I talked about David, and what it had felt like to be hidden, and what it had felt like when the relationship ended, and I realized the grief was not just about losing him, but about the 2 years I had spent making myself acceptable to a room I was never actually invited into. I talked about building my career in Seoul, project by project, in a city where I was frequently the only person who looked like me in the professional spaces I occupied, and how that had taught me to be prepared in ways that other people did not have to be prepared. I talked about Jin, about how frightening it had been at the beginning to trust someone again, not because of who Jin was, but because of what had been done to that trust before, about how he had been patient with that without making me feel like a project. And then I said something I want to share here, because I think it is the most useful thing I know. I said, "The right person does not ask you to make yourself smaller to fit into their life. They build a life that is big enough for who you actually are. And when someone tries to reduce you, when someone raises their hand in a public room because they need you diminished, the best thing you can do is simply refuse to be diminished. Not loudly, not dramatically, just structurally, from the inside. I stopped the recording at 4:42 in the morning. Jin appeared at my shoulder with a cup of tea. "You should sleep," he said. "In a minute," I said. I looked at the recording on my screen. At some point I thought I would know what to do with it. I think this is what to do with it. I am writing this from our apartment in Seoul, 11 months after the night at Incheon. The Jeju project is 12% into construction, on schedule, and more beautiful in its early physical stages than I dared imagine when it was still lines on a screen. My firm is stable and growing. I have a partner's office now with a window that looks directly south, which I specifically negotiated. Marcus Webb entered a plea agreement in connection with extortion and corporate espionage charges 7 months ago. He is currently engaged in a very expensive legal process with a very uncertain outcome. His consortium was dissolved. Vivienne Song contested the charges for 3 months before the weight of Shin's documentation and David's testimony made the contest impractical. Her case is ongoing, but her ability to operate professionally has been effectively ended. The families she previously extorted have been notified and provided with Shin's formal statement for use in their own legal remedies. Gregory Han did not face criminal charges. His conduct, while deeply disloyal, fell within a civil rather than criminal framework. He is no longer in architecture. I do not know what he does now, and I have not tried to find out. David Cho gave his full statement. His cooperation was noted by the prosecutor's office. His family's legal team negotiated an arrangement regarding the assault charge, not dismissed, but handled in a way that involved significant consequences and a formal public acknowledgement. I did not oppose the arrangement. I did not support it either. I was not asked, and I was content not to be asked. Chairman Cho issued a personal written apology to me. It was formal and correct, and I read it once and filed it and have not thought about it again. Jin and I announced our marriage publicly 6 months ago. It was covered briefly by the business press, a paragraph, a photograph, the basic facts. It was not dramatic. We did not need it to be dramatic. We knew what it was. His mother visited last month. She held my hands again when she arrived and said something to me in Korean. I asked Jin to translate later. He said she told me the apartment had good light. I told him to tell her. I chose it specifically for that reason. She already knew. A few weeks ago, I received a message from a young woman named Abina. She is 24, Ghanaian British and architecture graduate who has been offered a contract position in Seoul. She is terrified. She wrote to me through my firm's public inquiry address, a long, careful message that asked essentially one question wrapped in a great deal of polite context. Is it worth it? Coming somewhere so far from everything familiar, trusting that there is space for someone like me in a place like that. I sat with her message for a day before I replied. Then I recorded a voice memo. I think better out loud, and I sent her the transcript. I told her, the worst night of my life happened in an airport lounge in this city. A man who had once claimed to love me raised his hand across my face in a room full of people because he needed me to feel small enough that his plans could feel big. The room looked away. The staff looked at their shoes, and I sat very still with my hand on my cheek and thought about what to do next. I did not cry. I did not run. I went to the bathroom and filed the bid on my mobile data. I held my recording device and let the truth record itself. And I texted my husband 3 words because he was landing and I wanted him to land safely. By morning, everything that group of people had tried to protect was gone, and everything I had built was still standing. I told Abina, come to Seoul. Do the work. Build your thing with everything you have. Trust your instincts before you trust the room. The room will sometimes fail you, but your instincts, properly trained by hard experience, will not. And if anyone in any boardroom, any lounge, any space where you have earned the right to stand, tells you, with their words or their hands or their silence, that you do not belong, do not argue. Do not perform your credentials for them. Do not shrink. Just stay, do the work, move before they do. Because sometimes the most powerful thing in the room arrives quietly, 15 minutes after you do, and it is already on your side, because you were already on your own side first. Abina wrote back 3 days later, 2 words, I'm coming. I smiled at my phone for a long time. Then I put it down, picked up my coffee, and went back to the Jeju drawings. There is so much still to build. And that is where I will leave Amara's story, not in a moment of loud triumph, but in the quiet, solid piece of a woman who built something real and refused to let anyone take it apart. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something, if you found yourself nodding or holding your breath at any point, then you already know what this channel is about. We tell stories here that matter. Stories with layers, with truth inside them, with endings that feel earned. If you are not subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button right now and turn on your notifications so you never miss a single story. And before you go, drop a comment below and tell me where in the world you are watching this from. I read every single one. Whether you are watching from Lagos or London, Seoul or New York, Accra or Toronto, let me know you were here. Because every one of you being here is the reason these stories get told. See you in the next one.